David, are you familiar with buckets and ladders?
You mean Chutes and Ladders?
No, David, I'm talking about life.
You mean the board game Life?
No, real life with 401ks, IRA rollovers, and Roth conversions.
Oh, you're talking about the early retirement benefits of Roth conversion ladders.
Yeah, I don't really know what I'm talking about, which is why we invited accountant Brandon Clark of Reexamine Wealth onto the Career Money Podcast, episode 308, to talk about Roth conversion ladders and how they can help us and our Career Money listeners retire early.
Yeah, good thing we're not doing this alone. Take the first step in retiring early by paying off your credit card debt. Get your free copy of the 7-Step Credit Card Debt Slasher at queermoneypodcast.com.
Now, on with the show.
Hello, folks. Welcome back to another episode of the Queer Money Podcast. So today we're going to be climbing some ladders, both metaphorically, but also in our discussion.
Accountingly.
Right. So we're gonna cover a topic that honestly several of you have asked about in the Queer Money Facebook group, and John and I are interested in this topic as well for our personal finances. And so this is a topic that we're really kind of excited to uncover, but because there are so many places this conversation could go and it could go to some very deep places, we're going to try to cover a high level version of this. So we're going to climb it slowly. And of course, because we are talking about a topic that's related to taxes and related to retirement and your future, we suggest that you work with a professional if you're going to attempt this. Don't do this. What do they say? Don't do this at home alone.
No.
Don't try this at home.
Don't try this at home.
Right. Do not try this at home.
Yeah, definitely talk to an accountant or a financial services professional of some shape or form.
Right. And because it's a topic that John and I are not super familiar with, haven't gone through it on our own, we have invited Brandon Clark onto the podcast because Brandon not only has the tax background, but he has financial planning background, and he is going to help us uncover and answer some questions that we have and the ones that you have all asked us in the group as well.
The key takeaway here, though, is if you want to get free advice from anybody, have a podcast.
Well, none of this is going to cover our specifics, but welcome to the show, Brandon. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
You bet. Before we get started, just to give people a little bit of background, I have to say it, and I guess I have to say it this way. Someone's got to love it, right? It's not us, but someone's got to love it. So how did you get into accounting, especially taxes and accounting? Why is that your forte?
Oh boy. Where do I start? So let's see. I mean, believe it or not, I didn't wake up and come out of the womb wanting to study and be an accountant and learn all the tax code rules that there are. Basically it was the type of thing. I got out of school. I graduated from college in, what was it, like 2004. There was economic uncertainty. Jobs did not come easily. I went to a liberal arts school, and of course at liberal arts school you get these generic degrees. I majored in economics and sociology, which translated into lots of knowledge, but not a lot of practical knowledge. I did take an accounting course in college though, and that's where I learned, this is interesting. It's a system, it's usable. It's the language of business. And so then, as I was thinking about what to do, one of the other things was I lived in Washington, D.C. Lawyers in Washington, D.C. are a dime a dozen. So from that standpoint, it was like, I was kind of considering these two paths, so I was thinking, scarcity and also demand, and getting to learn the language of business, maybe accounting actually makes sense. And it actually did. I was able to, one of the other things was independence was important to me. Even way back then, I didn't know what FIRE was, but I had this hunch that I wanted to be able to do something on, to have my own practice of some sort, to basically, I could accumulate enough knowledge in some sort of topic, and then I would be able to kind of write my own ticket and gain more freedom. So kind of all those pieces together put me down this direction.
Nice.
So
I love
you
it. Very
went back to
strategic.
school and became an accountant, huh?
That's right. Yeah.
Nice.
So I went back, I got an MBA, and then I decided while I was there, I was going to get all the classes to become a CPA, and hopefully I would never have to worry about not being demanded in professional world again.
Well,
So
as I
far, it's
understand it, taxes are never going to go away. So if you ever fall in hard times, you can always do taxes.
Right. And for as often as they talk about simplifying the tax code, simplifying the tax code, simplifying the tax code, that is something that just keeps getting bigger and bigger and bigger.
That's like asking Congress people to have to not be able to place public trades.
Yeah, right.
So
yep.
you do have a new passion now, which is exciting and something that we're into as well. When and how did you discover FIRE, and what inspired you to start going down the path of early retirement?
I discovered FIRE, believe it or not, through family, so to speak. Before FIRE was even like a thing, I had a father and my grandfather, both were pretty thrifty and savvy with money. And they raised, my brother and I in a way where, they always focused on what money can do for you, on thrift, making sure that you get value for your money, and connecting like the fact that you actually go to work every day and have to earn money as well. So you might as well do something that is meaningful and that you want to do. And so I had
Mhm.
some great influences that way.
Nice.
Um, and then, a little earlier, I was talking about getting out of school and just, starting my first jobs. And it was just that feeling of, working so hard, and just kind of, not being able to be outside and enjoying like the world of things. And so I just knew that I wanted to kind of be as optimal as I could with my work. And so it was like, as I started to read all these personal finance columns, I think the first one was Michelle Singletary in Washington Post. I don't know if any of listeners are fans of hers, but she's pretty great. And then I started to find Mr. Money Mustache, and read the blogs, and then there were podcasts, and it was like, oh, wow, I love all these podcasts too. And so, I don't know, it was just like, finally, all of these people who are speaking the same language as my family, and all of these thoughts in my head, speaking them into existence or whatever it is. But yeah.
Yeah. So
You must be one of the unicorns, right? Because I think that the vast majority of us are not raised in households where we have parents who are sharing that kind of knowledge with us. Most of the time, I think, especially in the personal finance content creator space, we just find that there are a lot of people who have a bad money backstory, right? Either they're paid off a ton of
Yep.
credit card debt or student loan debt or some form of debt, or they were financial messes like John and I were. They have that kind of backstory. But there are few and far between. There are some people who somehow seem to do it right all along the way.
Well, I consider myself very lucky to have had that background,
Right.
but I can't say that I don't have my own money stuff too. Everyone's got it in some way. Like I've
everybody's got a
dealt with my
skeleton or two,
own
right?
my own scarcity mindset and things like that too. So anyway, but
Yeah.
yeah.
So as we climb this ladder, we're going to start talking a little bit more about retirement, right? And that's
Sure.
kind of the place we're going to take this first. Talking about Roths and Roth conversions. Let's first start with a Roth. What is a Roth, and what's the benefit of having it, specifically if you're looking to retire early? Folks,
Sure.
this whole podcast is kind of following under the financial independence theme that we have for this year, of the themes that we have for this year. So we're talking about early retirement. Why is it important to have a Roth IRA if you want to retire early?
Sure. So first off, a Roth IRA is it's a retirement account. Basically, you're able to put money into the account, and the contributions that you put into the account are going to be tax-free to you. And then, obviously that money will get to grow. And then if you follow the rules and don't take the earnings on that money out until after retirement, then, you're going to get to take out those earnings as well, tax-free. So anyway, back to the original question, why do you want to have a Roth IRA? The main thing is flexibility. It's sort of flexibility, but then also control. Ultimately, you want to be able to kind of roll with the punch, like during retirement or at any time. Basically, you want to be able to control taxes and kind of have flexibility to make your tax liability as low as possible, and having a Roth IRA is a way to do that.
Nice. And so can you explain how the Roth IRA might provide a little bit more flexibility with early retirement strategy than, say, like your 401k or a traditional IRA?
Sure. So, like I was saying before, the fact that taxes you can pull money out of that Roth IRA tax-free, that's going to enable you to avoid the 10%. So if you're pulling out just the contributions during early retirement from that Roth IRA, that's going to enable you to avoid the early withdrawal penalty that happens if you basically are accessing money from your retirement account before 59 and a half. So, if you set things up right, then, you can have this flexibility. And that's essentially, part of what we're trying to strategize here.
Right. So let's just give an example here, folks. Let's say at the age of 25, I got into the whole FIRE thing, and I decided that I was going to start putting away $5,000 a year into my Roth account. I need that for the next 20 years. You're basically saying that I have $100,000 of contributions that I could pull out of that account before I reach 59 and a half to be able to use however I want to use that, right?
Correct.
And not have to pay the 10% penalty, not have to pay any taxes on that. So that's where what part of the flexibility comes in, right? And then what you're saying is that after 59 and a half, then anything that's in the account, I can withdraw and not have to pay taxes on that either.
Correct.
Including the gains.
Right. Yeah, the gains.
Right. Exactly.
So I'm curious, from your experience, this might be hard because everybody's FIRE number is different. Is there because you want to contribute to your Roth IRA and you want that money to grow over time? Because even if you want to FIRE early, you want to make sure you have a nest egg by the time you're 65 or 70 years old, and likely won't be able to work anymore unless they figure out how to make us live forever. Is there a sort of a target minimum that you want to have in your Roth IRA before you start taking distributions out? Or not distributions, early withdrawals from the principal?
Sure. So I guess I focus, because everyone is so different, one of the things that I focus on in general is this idea of tax diversification overall. So when clients come to me, and so now I'm wearing, previously, I was a tax accountant. Now I'm more of a financial planner. So one of the things I look at with every client of mine is, let's look at your total portfolio, and now let's segment it by which kind of buckets you have. So you've got the tax-free bucket, which is Roth IRA, money that's you're going to be able to access tax-free. You've got tax deferred, which is money that's, you're going to have to pay a tax on to access it. So that's like your traditional 401k. And then you've got your taxable bucket, which is your brokerage account, savings accounts. So that's money where it's a piece of it is like any earnings on it's going to be currently taxable. And so those three buckets, we actually want to have some equilibrium between those three buckets to provide for flexibility. You don't want to go all in on any one of those buckets, because likely if you do that, it means that at some point in time, you've probably paid too much in taxes. So yeah, that's one thing that it's much easier to look at kind of in a whole and as part of a broader strategy, so to speak. And that's why I can't really give sort of like a hard rule of thumb. I know everyone kind of wants that, but hopefully that makes sense.
It does, and I think it speaks to David's point earlier, especially for those who are in the interested in FIRE, tend to have a hesitation of wanting to work with a financial advisor who works, gets paid off of assets under management. You still probably want to talk with a financial coach or a financial planner of some sort, so they can help you create that holistic strategy, and you're not reliant on one particular, prong or one particular strategy within that your whole early retirement plan.
Right. All right. So you mentioned buckets here. The one was the tax-free, which is the Roth. Then you mentioned tax deferred. And I think that's probably the place where the vast majority of us have a larger portion of our assets, right? That's our 401ks. That's where that money that our employer and we ourselves have put money into. And there are also a lot of us who are old people who didn't have the option.
I have this filter on super high, so I don't look old.
But for those of us who had a working career, a fairly decent working career before the Roth came about, or weren't aware of it enough and were always putting our money into our traditional 401k and didn't have access to a Roth 401k or a Roth IRA. So that's the taxable portion, right? That's
Correct.
If I pull money out of that, not only if I'm under 59 and a half, I'm going to pay a 10% penalty. And if I'm going to pay taxes on the money that comes out. If I'm over 59 and a half, I'm just going to pay taxes on the money that comes out, right?
Yep.
Okay. So we kind of have these two buckets now.
Buckets and ladders. I feel like this is a game.
How do we
early retirement game?
How do we take from one bucket and put it into the other
game.
bucket, right? This is the whole crux of this. What is a Roth conversion? And what are kind of some of the rules around it? Why is it so popular with the FIRE community, and especially as we get to this point of doing these regularly? What's the value?
Sure. So a Roth conversion is, it's a tactic that allows you to take money from your traditional, 401k, traditional IRA. I was going to say, typically what you're going to have to do is, if it's in a 401k, you're first going to have to move it to a traditional IRA, and then it's going to move from the IRA to the Roth IRA. Anyway, but the idea is that you're going to pay taxes on the money in the year of the conversion. And then the IRS has a 5-year rule where they say, you have to wait 5 years until you're able to access that money. And so what the Roth conversion allows you to do is to get money out of that, tax deferred bucket and into that tax-free bucket. And so, you're basically setting up this, this flexibility for yourself. If you didn't previously have the opportunity to fill up, the Roth IRA, you're now taking advantage of this strategy. It's allowing you to do that.
So you do I guess would that be considered a rollover from the 401k, 457, 450,
correct,
453 to the traditional would be considered a rollover.
Correct.
And then it would be considered a conversion from the traditional
tax-free rollover, and then the conversion from the traditional IRA over to the Roth IRA that's the taxable event.
Okay, and then the money needs to stay in there for 5 years before you can start tapping into it to fund your early retirement.
Correct. Yeah. If you want to avoid the penalty on that conversion and be able to access it, it has to, stay within the account for 5 years.
And that would be a 10% penalty?
Correct. It's a 10% penalty that you'll pay.
Okay.
Yep.
So for those of you who are listening who are younger, and I know that the Criminality Podcast listeners typically skew a little bit older, but for those of you who are younger and just starting off your working years, and you want to retire early, this might be something to keep in mind. Obviously there's a million great reasons to invest in a 401k, 457, all those company sponsored type plans or organization sponsored type plans. But if you want to retire early, you kind of maybe want to have a multi-pronged approach here, like Brandon had talked about earlier, and consider how much you want to maybe contribute to a Roth IRA. Well, hold on, I'm getting confused here.
Yeah, no, you're right, John. I was
Contribute
actually
to
wanting,
both.
this
Yeah.
is one of the points that I wanted to make too, is just,
You're smarter
you
than
know,
me. Say
Roth
it.
Roth conversions are a great tactic. However, if you've got the opportunity to also be funding the Roth IRA early and often, start filling it up as early and often as you can. And so that by the time you get out to your retirement date, especially if you want to retire early,
Mhm. Right.
you'll have those contributions in, and that'll be money that you can access. And then you'll also have the, remaining money in the earnings that's had time to compound. So
Right.
yep.
That's exactly what I was going to say. Thank you for articulating it better than me.
Right. So I know that a lot of people say max out your 401k and then put money into your Roth IRA. You're saying obviously it really depends on the situation. Some people who can max out their 401ks, they make this is kind of a funny thing to say, but some people do make too much money, right, to
Yeah.
be able to contribute to a Roth IRA. So, right, so you may be at a point where you're not able to contribute, but you're also saying that maybe it might make sense to not contribute, max out your your 401k. You might want to put money into your 401k and put some money into a Roth IRA.
Right. Yeah. And this is another one of those where like it can depend. I hate to say that too much, but if you want to retire really early, then you really do want to, you may want to forego some of the tax deferral that from putting in the 401k, and actually, make sure that you're starting early fund that Roth IRA. The other thing too, though, is you've got two different limits you're working with. So if you're a high earner and you put all of your money into your traditional 401k, and then you still have the ability to fund your Roth IRA, then hey, you've still got the ability, you're still funding both. So there's just different things to think about depending on sort of when you want to retire, how high is your income now, different pieces like that.
So I'll put a stake in the ground. I'll say that if you're trying to figure out how much to put into your company sponsored plan versus your Roth, maybe at minimum contribute enough to your company sponsored plan to get the match. And then maybe after that, go for the Roth or some other equation, because otherwise you're losing money.
Correct.
Right. Okay.
All right. So let's start climbing this ladder here. What is, we know what a Roth is. We know what a Roth conversion is. That's moving money from one bucket to the other. What is a Roth conversion ladder?
All right. So the Roth conversion ladder. So it's essentially a tactic that's going to allow you tiers of tax and penalty-free money for later years. So basically the ladder concept is it's a multi-year strategy. You're going to do some this year, you're going to do some next year after that. I was going to say you may do one from here until you're like 70, basically, if it works out right. Basically the reason why you're doing the ladder, there's two different tax rules. It's both the 5-year withdrawal rule that we mentioned before, and the fact that you've got to have those 5 years that pass by before you can actually access the money. That's part of the reason why you do the ladder. The other part too, though, is just the way the tax code works. Let's see, we have what's called a graduated tax system, and I'll try to make this as simple as I can. But basically, as your income kind of notches up, it's like you're kind of climbing these stairs. And then after each stair you climb, so to speak, with your income rising, you pay tax at a higher level. And so when you think about your Roth conversion, that's going to add money to that highest step. And so part of what we're doing to do a successful conversion ladder here is that we don't want to pay tax at too high of a level. We don't want to pay more taxes now than you're going to pay later on if you had just waited till you early retired to take that money out. So we're basically, the ladder strategy helps us to figure out helps us to kind of optimize what's the right amount to take out for a given year, so that we can kind of start to like, you're basically setting up money for yourself later on. I think
So
yeah.
it is, because the concern is, I think, is what you're saying. If you take too much out in a given year, you could bump yourself into the next tax bracket. And that's
Correct.
something you want to avoid. And that'll be contingent on what your take home, what your income is, right?
Yes.
Yeah,
Yes.
so I could be earning $50,000 a year and be in a lower tax bracket, and obviously not the lowest, but in a lower tax bracket. But then if I decided, okay, I've got $100,000 sitting in my IRA rollover that was previously at my previous employers, I want to convert all 100,000 of that. You would probably say, hold on. Doesn't make sense.
I was already like, oh my gosh, calm down.
Right. You would probably say, hold on. Let's actually run some numbers, right? Because that would then all of a sudden bump you into a really high tax bracket.
Correct.
And you would pay a lot. So you would probably say, this is where it makes sense for you to start thinking about doing it as a ladder, where every year over a number of years or here on out, you're going to roll some over. Okay.
Yep. Yeah, that's exactly it. And so I actually have put together, 4 different questions to kind of help guide people on this. And so the first question is, what's your current marginal means highest? What's your current highest tax bracket, or tax rate? Second question is, how much will you spend later on? In retirement, the year that you're trying to fund, have some idea of what that is. The next part is, will a conversion actually save you taxes? When you look at that amount that you're trying to fund later and the need to pull out, money from your retirement accounts, are you actually going to be paying a higher tax now versus later? And then the final question is, what's the optimal amount to convert? Based on all those factors. So I was going to say they're not the easiest questions to answer, but I do feel like they are enough to give people direction and to kind of, to help you start formulating what amounts might make sense for you. And, if you choose not to work with a professional, and if you work with a professional, if they aren't figuring out these questions and they're just saying, oh yeah, let's just take a $200,000 conversion this year. Yep, let's do it.
It's time to work with a more professional.
To tell them to just pump the brakes. So
I think those are great questions, at least directional for people. They'll kind of give them what direction they want to go in, and it could be that the answers to those questions change over time,
right?
But at least it helps you move the ball forward.
Yep, definitely.
I just have one other question here. If someone does a Roth conversion, now let's say, right now you're allowed to put a maximum of 6,000 into your Roth, unless you're 50 years or older, then you can put 7,000, right? But if somebody does a conversion, and let's say I did a conversion, if you're
talking to Brandon,
if you're not watching this on YouTube, John is making eyes at me right now because of my comment about I'm now at our accountant jokingly last year said I'm now able to put $7,000 a year into a Roth IRA. So I'm over 50. Anyway, let's get back to the question.
Slight denial of
throwing
Roth
some
IRA
shade
status
here. So if I do a Roth conversion, and let's say it makes sense for me to do a Roth conversion of $20,000 after the 5-year period, I can take all $20,000 out if I need to access it, right?
Correct. Yeah.
So it's a much larger contribution that I'm putting in, even though it's not truly a contribution, but it acts like a contribution that I can pull that money out. And okay, so that is probably then why it makes sense for folks who are in the early retirement space to start doing this if they are able to, because then they have larger chunks of money that they can access rather than if you've only contributed a couple $1,000s a year for the last 10 years, right? You could only access maybe $20,000. But if I did Roth conversions of $20,000 over a 5-year period, I have up to $100,000 I could access, or $20,000 a year for 5 years I could access.
Mhm.
Okay. All right. So what are the tax consequences of doing this?
Sure.
What happens to my taxes if I decide I've got $20,000 that I want to roll over into from my traditional 401k, or roll over into a Roth IRA?
Sure. Yeah, so it's essentially that you're going to end up paying taxes at your highest tax rate. So, basically you're going to, when you look at your tax return, you'll see, your wage income, your dividends or interest or whatever there is. And then kind of, I like to say kind of on top of those pieces, think about, the amount that you're potentially going to convert, and that will be added to your taxable income. Then of course you'll be able to deduct out your standard or your itemized deductions. And then, that's basically going to determine what tax rate you pay. So it's just that marginal federal, and then depending on what state you live in, your state taxes as well. Yeah.
Right. And
And
this
then, oh, sorry, go ahead.
No, that's good. That's why it's really important to understand when you're doing these conversions, because you could bump yourself up into a higher
Correct.
tax bracket.
Correct.
So you want to make sure you don't do that.
Yep. Well, if you, and it's not always bad to get bumped into the next highest tax rate, but we also just want to see, is that tax rate going to be, does it have the potential to be lower or higher than what you might do later on to access that money? And it's not always the case that it's going to happen that way. And the other thing I was going to add to this is I had a few different, what was you call it, tips for a beneficial conversion. So the first thing is at the lowest tax rate possible. And so, basically you want to convert at the lowest tax rate you possibly can. These, I guess, a couple times when this applies are during lower earning years. So let's say one spouse takes some time off for, maybe unfortunately a layoff, or, having a child, or the pandemic, and you just got tired of your job, whatever it is, you're going to pay lower. You potentially are going to have a lower marginal tax rate. The other thing to think about right now through 2025 is the fact that we do have lower tax rates that we're all paying. And I was going to say probably 80% of people, I would guess, are paying a lower tax rate. In some cases, maybe 2%, some cases more like 8% than they were paying under the old tax laws. And those laws are in place through the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act through 2025. And I mean, who knows what'll happen then, but there's something to think about. Anyway, back to the rules. Second rule is as early as possible. The reason why I say as early as possible for these conversions is just that the earlier you convert, the earlier or the longer you're going to have for that money to grow within your Roth IRA. The same way that compounding and so forth is great for your investments, it's great for your retirement accounts and this Roth account, because we want to see that Roth as big as possible. Right. And then the other part is during a recession or a correction in the market, and I guess what I call that is converting on sale. Everyone loves sale. But when you think about it, with your Roth IRA, if you can take out a smaller conversion after the market goes down, pay lower taxes on that smaller conversion, and then, hopefully the market will recover, as it always will at some point, and then that money will, have the chance to grow as well.
That's right. When you do a conversion, you can't move assets over. You got to move cash over, right?
I think you can actually, so it depends on your institution. Some institutions will actually let you move the securities too. But but what goes on your tax return is, let's say you did 2 shares of Apple. Those 2 shares of Apple will be smaller. And so less money is going to go onto the tax return to get taxed,
right?
So to speak, if you think about that.
Yeah, a lot of people in their 401ks and 457s and whatnot are in institutional shares, so they probably can't do a rollover / conversion with institutional shares.
That's true. That makes sense. Okay, so
sometimes
you say that that there's some taxes due when you do this. You can kind of explain that.
Sure.
I'm not getting any money, right? It's going from my traditional or rollover IRA over to my Roth IRA. Why do I have to pay taxes on something I didn't get anything from?
Yeah, that is the hard thing about taxes. And that was one of the parts of doing taxes for people that was the most painful, was because they were like, I don't know, I don't see any of this money.
Right.
Why do I have to pay taxes? But the idea is, when you look at your net worth and your overall financial picture, it is improving, so to speak. Just because that money is not going into your hands doesn't mean that you didn't have some benefit from it. So basically, what the IRS does is you have to report on your tax return the amount that you converted, and then the tax rate will be computed based on that dollar amount. And on April 15th of the year after the conversion takes place, you got to pony that money up. So just be prepared for it. And it's best to come from, you don't want to act, I was going to say, it's best to come from money outside of a retirement account, because so you don't pay more taxes on it.
So
Uncle Sam always has his grubby mitts out.
Yeah. So what happens if April 15th rolls around and I'm, oh, shit, I don't have money to pay for all these taxes? I can undo this, right?
No, it is not undoable. You will be in debt to Uncle Sam, and you will have to do a payment plan. And it's the IRS does allow payment plans. You pay interest on them. None of it's fun, but this is another reason why I say, follow those rules, pump the brakes, don't get too excited here, because this is a multi-year strategy, basically. And it's not something to just like, oh, I heard about this awesome conversion or Roth conversion tactic, Roth conversion ladder strategy. Like, let's go, get it done.
Yeah, right.
But Brandon said so, I could do it.
Right. So folks, you've heard John and I use the analogy that we say that credit cards are like swimming in the deep end when it comes to your finances. Roth conversions, Roth conversion ladders are like swimming in shark-infested ocean. So unless you're in a cage, and that cage is your financial professional giving you the advice, you don't want to do it. All right. So again, why might someone want to use this or do this? What's the really end value of it?
Sure. So one of the big things is, exactly like you were saying before, David, especially if you've got a lot of your money is concentrated in those pre-tax accounts. Yeah, it's happened to a lot of people. I know. Yeah. I'd say the majority of the clients I've ever worked with, most of their income, or sorry, most of their investments are concentrated there. So that's a great time to think about it. The other part is when you first enter early retirement, that's another great time to start the Roth conversion ladders, because when you think about it, that's going to be some of the lowest tax brackets that you'll face and lowest tax rates you'll face. And so then, of course, though, you'll be setting up, future years of available money, but that's still great. For people who are retiring closer to traditional retirement, and let's say you're around 60 and you are trying to avoid RMDs, those required minimum distributions from traditional, pre-tax accounts that you have to start paying for at 72. That's it, at the age of 60, taking money out and doing these conversions is another way to avoid those higher tax rates that can come later. So yeah, it's essentially, it's for early retirees to make sure that you've got money to spend. It's for later, it's for a little bit of everyone. Everyone can benefit on some level as long as you're not a super high earner, and then you're going to go into a lower earning time period after retirement, then yeah, you can generally benefit from this.
Got you.
It's
So then
also a great, so I'm just going to throw this in there, speaking from experience. It's a great strategy for folks who are starting their entrepreneurial endeavors. And
Yes.
if you have decided to quit your traditional 9-to-5 job and you're switching, because we know that's happening in mass right now. More
Yes.
companies were started in 2021 than any time period before. If you are starting your own business and you're going into your entrepreneurial endeavors, and the vast majority of us don't out the gate start earning 6 figures, right?
Yep.
So you may be in a lower income bracket and you want to retire early. This is a perfect time to start thinking about doing it. This is, as John mentioned at the outset, we're kind of doing this selfishly to get some of this knowledge, because John and I.
Where were you 8 years ago, Brandon?
Yeah.
Sorry.
We want to start doing this.
John, that's David, that's a great point. Those are some of the best candidates for it. Not only because of that part, but you also, usually when you are an entrepreneur, especially if you're like a solopreneur, you have access to solo 401ks. Sorry if I'm going too deep into the nerd weeds, but solo 401ks, you can really start to pack away some money, which can help you to lower your overall taxes. So you're kind of like, you're setting up more money into the traditional accounts, but then you're also like moving money over, which is this great sort of like, you're moving money into all these different places, but keep getting it so it's not taxable, and
find which shell the money is under. So we're moving things around. Right?
Yeah, I was going to say, I guess this is the part where people start to think about us tax accountants as like, you're just doing all these random things like moving all this money around, and it starts to get weird. But this is all legal stuff. It's not really that. There's nothing that you're doing that's seedy. It's just being savvy.
Nice. I love it. I do have to say, I've had more boring tax discussions than today.
Yeah.
This is actually quite entertaining and exciting. So
Yeah.
I'm a little bit disappointed we didn't do it sooner ourselves, but maybe it's something we need to start considering. But to that point, you kind of alluded to it earlier. Since our listeners do skew a little bit older, is there an age? Do you reach an age when maybe this doesn't make sense, where it might be, I don't know what the right word is, cost prohibitive, where the value is just not there anymore?
I would just say, if you are skewing older, like if you are older, and you're also in your higher earning years, there may not be as much value. Like if you're in, let's say that you make $400,000 a year, so you're probably in the higher, like 32% or higher tax bracket. And now you're trying to consider doing conversions. The case for doing them, especially if you're going to retire soon or retire early, it just may not be there. But otherwise, like I said, even once you like get towards like 60s, considering some sort of ladder, maybe your ladders are just a little smaller. It just depends on your case and how much you're looking to kind of fund and where your other money sources are. So,
right.
Yeah. I think one of the important things to think about is, you mentioned the growth, right? The in your traditional IRA, you pay taxes on not only the money coming out, but the growth that comes out as well, right? So you put the money in, you're paying taxes on the money you put in, but you're also paying taxes on that growth. Whereas in the Roth IRA, you're not paying taxes on that growth. So $5,000 today when I'm 60, sitting in my traditional IRA that grows to $50,000, I have to pay taxes on all $50,000. But if I move that $5,000 over to Roth IRA and it grows to $50,000, I don't have to pay taxes on any of that, because I already paid the taxes when I moved the money over, when I did the conversion.
Yeah, I mean, that's essentially how it works. But I guess the thing is to also think about too, is that while that money's growing, that 50,000 future dollars, the tax code is kind of like creeping up there too. Like each year, the tax code gets adjusted for inflation and so forth as well. So it's like definitely part of what you're saying. It definitely makes sense too. But there is a thing where you don't want to just I guess I do caution people, because I have seen a lot of younger clients, especially higher earning clients, who just say, oh, Roth all the way, Roth all the way. But then I see them paying taxes at like the 37% bracket. And it's like,
Yeah.
and that like ultimately the fact that we do have a graduated rate system means that in retirement, you very well could end up like, if you don't have crazy spending habits or something like that, then you may be missing out. Like each one of us gets around, what is it, like $12,000 each year as a freebie. That's not taxable. And then we don't usually get into the higher tax brackets, like the 20% bracket, until around $100,000 in income. So just some pieces to think about. It's sort of, there's some optimizing to it.
All the more reason to talk to somebody who knows more than you. With that being said, how can folks find you and follow you and stay engaged with all things Brandon?
All things Brandon. So my platform is called Reexamine Wealth. I am a financial planner and coach. So I work with people who are on the path to financial independence. I like to work with people who are, DIY investors, entrepreneurs, and so forth, and basically help them to build a plan that will work for them. So I work with people on mindset, setting the right goals, and then also optimizing your money.
Nice. I love it.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Brandon. You gave us a lot to think about, and you probably scared some people into wanting to take some action here. So thank you very much. We appreciate it.
Thank you guys for having me. Hopefully not too much on the scary.
No, not scary at all.
Thank you, Brandon, for talking to us about Roth conversion ladders and how they can help us retire early. And thank you, listeners, for listening to another episode of the Queer Money Podcast.
Here's your Queer Money takeaway from this episode. If you have or are building a sizable company-sponsored retirement plan and think you might want to retire early, talk with a tax professional about how Roth conversion ladders might benefit you. Maybe even connect with Brandon Clark at Reexamine Wealth for future guidance.
Then join us next week when we talk about how to find your purpose in life. Meanwhile, take the first step to retiring early by paying off your credit card debt. Get your free copy of the 7-Step Credit Card Debt Slasher at queermoneypodcast.com. Thanks again, and have a great week.